All right, good morning. And last week, we finished up a series called Fearless. So now we are back into the Renew series. And this series is based on the book of Ephesians. And, I was thinking that when the Apostle Paul wrote this writing was revolutionary to these people. These people had grown up as pagans, they had grown up in dysfunctional families, they had grown up in a lifestyle that was completely opposite of what God wanted. And when the Apostle Paul wrote these instructions, I'm sure these people were just trying to kind of make this all fit in their heads and make the adjustment to this new way of life. And the verses that we're going to study today must have just shocked them, and they were trying to get this to work in their heads. So we're going to Ephesians 5. We're going to start at verse 21, and I encourage you to look these verses up so that you can follow along. These verses are going to take us into a new area of application. So here's kind of the flow of how Ephesians works. The first half of Ephesians gives us all the theory of what it means to be renewed in Christ. The second half of Ephesians is the application of that renewal. And so far, what the Apostle Paul has done up through till these verses, he has been basically applying it to everybody universally and talking to them about how they want to connect as a church and as individuals. And now he's going to shift. He's going to shift into family mode. He's going to talk about how to renew your family. And specifically today, we're going to learn how God's transformation of our heart affects our marriages. All right, so before we dive into these verses, I want to give credit where credit is due. I'm taking a lot of the information that I'm talking about today from Dr. Emerson Eggerich's book called Love and Respect. I think it's a fabulous book, and his writing and his book, he says that these verses are genius. He's a pastor, and he's a marriage counselor. And he's like, the depth of wisdom in these verses is astounding. And if we apply it, it will bring balance and renewal to our relationship. So I'm going to first read through, and then we'll go back and we'll kind of pick it apart and really look at it. So Ephesians 5, starting at verse 21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and they care for their body, just as Christ does for the church. For we are members of his body. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And this is a profound mystery. But I'm talking about Christ in the church. However, each one of you must also love your wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Okay, so if you go back to verse 21, the Apostle Paul sets this first line. He says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And he's talking to both husbands and wives there. And this line is the foundation for everything from verse 22 through 33. And so verses 22 and 33 are really commentary on verse 21. And the whole point of verse 21 is that you're supposed to submit to each other. Okay? Now, I want to skip down to verse 32 for just a second. You'll see there that he again emphasizes that the marriage relationship should reflect to the picture of how the church relates to Christ. He says, this is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ in the church. And so it's almost confusing because he kind of tosses in, well, I'm talking about marriage, but I'm talking about the church in Jesus. It's like, it's the same thing. He's saying that our marriages should have this same picture as how Christ and the church relate to each other. And so he's using this picture of Jesus and the church as his foundation. Now, if you remember in chapters 2 through 4 of Ephesians, Paul emphasized that God gave us diversity in order to make us complete. In other words, there are people who aren't like you in order to complete you. And when we live in unity, we allow each other to be that completion. And so he tells the church that they should live in unity despite the fact that they're coming from different nationalities, they're coming from different economic situations, they're coming from different status levels, and they're coming with different spiritual gifts. And he's saying when those get bonded together into a single body of believers, everybody benefits. And he's painting that same picture for the marriage, that the husband and the wife come with different abilities, and when you bond those together, everybody benefits. So, it's just easy for us to forget this, right? Where our differences become barriers rather than benefits. We forget that those differences are for us, not against us. And ladies, I'm betting as soon as I started reading these verses, or as soon as you found these verses, there was some of you who had a certain sense of dread. Oh no, not these verses. Well, I have good news for you. By the time I'm done here, everybody's going to feel that same dread. Now, there is this challenge that the Apostle Paul has for both sides. And the good news is that he's not setting up a hierarchy here. He's setting up a balance here. And so, ladies, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to deal with your verses first. I'm going to talk to the guys first. And only after I've made them thoroughly uncomfortable will we come back and talk about the verses that talk to you. So that means that we're going to skip over verses 22 through 24 and jump right to verse 25. And guys, we're going to talk first. Okay, I'm going to go back and read that again just so that we're all in the same spot. Starting at verse 25, it says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself." Okay, guys. First of all, remember, this is commentary on verse 21. Verse 21 says we're going to submit to each other. Now, these verses explain how the guy submits. It's an explanation of what that looks like. And do you understand what the Apostle Paul's challenge is here? Because once you understand it, it does get uncomfortable. He's saying that our version of submission is to play the part of the sacrificial leader, just like Jesus. And let's just remind ourselves of what that picture looks like. Can I get that picture? This is the picture Jesus has of us in the marriage relationship. I hope you're uncomfortable with this, because I certainly am. The head, Jesus is the head of this church, and that's his picture of headness. Total sacrifice. That's what it means to lead. And if you'll remember, like Jesus told his disciples, well, the world sees leadership as like this authority, this status. Not so with you. If you're going to be first, you need to be last. And so we're head of the family, right? So where does that put us? Yeah, that's uncomfortable, because that wasn't the picture of marriage that I had when I got married. That wasn't what I was hoping for. And yet that is what God calls us to do and to be. And why would the Apostle Paul use this picture of love and submission for us? Well, it's because it's our weakness. We as guys have a tendency to see love as this sense of honor and respect. When someone loves us, our expectation is that they hold us up as honorable and they look up to us. That's what makes us feel good. That's what makes us feel loved. And so we associate love and honor together. And we don't necessarily associate love with self-sacrifice. That's not how we would naturally do it. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do I offer sacrificial love? Do I give sacrificial love to my wife? Is that my style of putting her first? And sacrificial love for me is when I value Peggy over everything, including the football game. Because that's, when it's 4th down in inches and she's trying to have a discussion with me, like, that's sacrificial love, right? To set the football game aside and to put all my focus on her takes this sense of sacrifice. And here's what I've noticed, is that type of love is easier for Peggy than it is for me. I've watched her. She will sacrifice her wants, her needs, in order to put me and the kids first. I would say it's almost instinctual for her. And it isn't for me. That isn't the first way that I would show love. And so, if I really want to be loving to her, I have to take on that sacrificial love approach. Okay, ladies, I think the guys are a little uncomfortable now. So now let's talk with you. And so let's read those verses. We're backing up to verse 22. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Okay, ladies, now, first of all, before I dive into this, let me apologize for the times that guys have used these verses in the wrong way. Because they've used these verses as to set up a hierarchy and perch themselves on top. Second of all, as we talk about this, I'm going to work really hard to explain these verses as Paul intended, and to explain it in a way that works for you. I realize I'm a guy, and so being able to really see things from your perspective, I'm not going to be good at that. And so I'm hoping that you'll give me a little grace as I try to place my mind in your perspective and present this in a way that relates to you. Okay, so I'm going to remind you, first of all, that these verses are a commentary on verse 21, right? Submit yourselves to each other. And this is about submitting, and for the guys, sacrificial love is not instinctual. And I would maybe think that giving submission and honor to someone else might not be instinctual. Sacrificial love seems instinctual to you, but honoring love might be a stretch. I look at Peggy and I'm amazed at how quickly she will sacrifice all kinds of things in order to put me first. But for you ladies, it seems like the Apostle Paul is emphasizing this submissive love. And why would he do that? Is it because that it's hard? Again, I don't see things from your perspective, but it seems like holding someone up in honor is not instinctual for you, and maybe that's what he's challenging you to do. And so I'm just going to ask you, do you naturally give honor to your husband? Do you hold him up as a leader? And what does that look like? Well, it means celebrating his positive traits, celebrating his successes, and offering him words of honor that he invests in you and your family. Now, just remember, we honor Christ, we did so this morning, by celebrating all that he's done for us. Does that make you less of a person? I hope not. I hope you don't feel like less of a person because you've given Christ honor. At least from a guy's point of view, that doesn't, I don't feel less because I'm honoring Christ. And I think that's the picture that the Apostle Paul is trying to create for you, is that you can honor someone without being degraded. And just remember that these verses were not designed to set up a hierarchy of who's in control. This was designed to challenge both sides to really love the other in ways that work. Okay, now here's where I'm going to back up, and I'm going to talk about Dr. Egerich's book, The Love and Respect book. Now, he tells us that these verses 21 through 33, are genius because of what they do in the relationship. They renew the relationship, okay? So I'm going to put up this graphic that kind of summarizes the concepts in his book. He says that when we love our spouse the way they hear love, they will naturally respond in love back. When men offer sacrificial love, women tend to go like, yeah. And he says that when women offer honoring love, men kind of go like, yeah. And it bonds them together and renews their relationship and encourages that growth. Now, unfortunately, our instincts are backwards. Guys tend to offer love by honoring. So they honor their wife, and then she doesn't feel loved, and they wonder why. And if women offer submissive love, it's not quite how guys feel loved, and so then they don't feel loved. And so the marriage drifts apart instead of bonds together. I was thinking that this description is similar to what we did when we were dating. Do you remember going back when you were dating? Just put this picture in your head of two people who are dating, and the guy shows up with flowers in hand, and he goes and gets the gal. He even runs around to the other side of the car, opens the door for her, helps her get in. If she's cold, he quickly takes off his jacket and gives it to her. He has this sense of protection around her and caring for her. And when they're sitting together, he gazes deep into her eyes and he tells her what a treasure she is. And how does she respond to that? That seems to be attractive to her. After all, you got married, right? Okay? And ladies, when you were dating, you spent 3 hours getting ready. You got all dressed up, and you sat beside him, and you questioned him about his dreams and where he wanted to go, and you honored him with words of admiration, and you had him dream about the future and the way he would lead and protect you, and you had this sense of faith in him. You maybe even treated him a bit like he was a hero. And how did he respond to that? He seemed to be attracted to that, to the point where he got down on a knee in front of you and begged you to be his bride. Yeah, it was like at one point, this was instinctual. Like, we were like, wait a minute, if I want love, this is how you get it. And then we got married, and we got dumb. Right? We quit. At least that's the temptation that I fight, is to just kind of go on with life and just do life and forget to look at Peggy and treasure her and encourage her and to be sacrificial for her and to protect her. And what if we went back to that? What if we made decisions to go back to that lifestyle? And as I was writing this, I was thinking to myself, wow, how much have I been sacrificial for Peggy? How much do I protect her and care for her and give her those words of affirmation and have this passionate love, give her that sense of, I am passionate about you. You are the treasure of my life. And I think to myself, and I go, yeah, not a lot. And what would happen if I did? What if I had this attitude of dating my wife on a continual level? Now, I can tell you that there's probably one other issue that kind of gets in the way of us moving forward with this new life, this renewed marriage. And that's, okay, who's going to start, right? And our attitude is like, you start first, right? When you start doing it, then I'll start doing it. When you start offering me honor, then I'll start being sacrificial. Or the ladies, when you start being sacrificial, then I'll start treating you with honor. Dr. Egerich talks about this. He goes, who should start? Who should start this? And he said, well, based on my understanding, the person who is more mature and more godly should be the person to start. And I was thinking to myself, well, then Peggy has to start. No, I read that and I'm like, no, I'm the head of the home. I should start. And if we both take on the attitude of, I'm the one who's responsible to start, where could our marriages go, and how could they improve, and how can we feel that love that we really, really want, and that we dreamed of when we first got married? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close out by just giving you an opportunity to go into the prayer thing and just to sit and connect with Jesus. Guys, we're the head. We represent the authority of Christ, the way Christ visualized and demonstrated authority to us. We submit to our husbands by giving a sacrificial, passionate love. Ladies, you represent love to us in a way that when you give us honor, that lights us up. That just makes us go. And so I'm just going to give you just this opportunity to close your eyes, connect with Christ, talk to him about the way he has loved us, the sacrifice that he's given to us. Honor him for that, love him, and all of us just thank him for the way he has cared for us and loved us beyond all measure. And then talk to him about what you want to do this week, today. about honoring your spouse.